लाइट थोड़ा कम होगी. All right. So may I have your attention, please? I would want you to keep your phones on mute and give me your undivided attention, right? May I have you here so that I can see? Because otherwise, it will be very difficult for me to go back and forth. All right, good morning, everybody, and a very happy new year. I'm Snowburn. I'm professor and head of the Department of Biosciences, Integral University, Lucknow. And I'll be talking about the 2 units of your course, which deals with research publications and ethics. Before we move on to the content of the course, I would like to make it very clear to all of you that UGC has very recently, in fact, not very recently, 3-4 years back, they made it mandatory that all the research scholars should be made aware of the rules and regulations that govern research publications, right? So, and responsible conduct of research. Now, the question is why this thing came to their mind, like why did UGC, the University Grants Commission, think about introducing this course as a part of coursework for the research scholars. So do you have any idea about why they would have suggested that we should make students aware of this, the practices, ethical practices in research? No idea? You can think about it later on, right? But a body suggested to all the universities that we should have a course on ethics and integrity in research, and we should make all the incoming research scholars aware about it. Why did they tell us this? Because they wanted that the incoming research scholars, incoming research fellows should be fully aware of the guidelines that govern research. They should be aware of the penalties that will be, that they might encounter if they do not adhere to the correct ethical practices. So we are going to talk about all those ethical practices and why it's important to be honest and objective in research. All right? Okay. So the objective of ethics and integrity in research is to basically make you aware of different guidelines, how your research will be, guided throughout your 4 years or 5 years of stay here. And this is not for your 5 years of PhD. The research publication ethics guidelines govern you throughout your life, if you want to continue in academia, right? Because whatever you are doing in your research has some societal impact. You will have some subjects, you'll have some volunteers who are a part of your research project. So it's the guidelines are also to protect those participants, protect the dignity of those participants. All right. So, right. Yeah. So we went very forward. So yeah, I generally start with the great saying of our great scientist Albert Einstein, who was of the opinion that it's not the intellect, it's not the science that matters, it's not the intellect that makes anybody a great scientist, but it's the honesty and the will of that person that makes anybody a great scientist. Then when you are able to maintain your own highest standards of integrity, regardless of what others may do, you are destined for greatness, right? So maybe thousands of people around the cohort that you are working in, they may not adhere to the highest standards of integrity because they might think that it's okay to take a shortcut, it's okay to falsify a result, right? But you don't have to do that, because when you're able to maintain your own highest standards of integrity, your own moral compass, regardless of what others may be doing, what others are doing, you have to do what you think is right, right? So that will make you great. Now, the thing is, it's not moving. Okay. So your academic research involves many coordinated steps. By now, you might have understood that academic research, your research problem, it involves many coordinated steps, which involve data processes, isn't it? Appropriate study design. So your research problem would involve appropriate study design, study execution, collection, data analysis, and finally publication. So what is the flow chart of your academic research? If we talk about the flow of your academic research, what does it involve? It involves many coordinated steps, right? What are those? First is, what is the first step? Identification of the problem, isn't it? पहले कैसे शुरू करेंगे? We'll start with the identification of the problem, and then we'll start with appropriate study design, isn't it? We'll go for steps how we are going to execute the problem. We'll think about what are the data collection points, how we are going to collect the data. We'll talk about, we'll also look for methods, how we are going to analyze the data. And finally, what is the culmination of your research proposal or your project? What will happen at the end of your PhD? Interpretation. Sorry? Findings. You will disseminate the findings, you will publish your findings, right? You will make sure that your whatever you have obtained, whatever result you have obtained after analysis, it's the correct perspective is disseminated in the audience. So finally, you will have a publication or a patent as a result of your research, isn't it? So all these steps, how many steps do you have? At least 6 or 7 steps. All these steps are guided by different principles. All right? Okay? At every step, you have to follow different guidelines. Okay? You have to make sure that your study plan is robust. So how will you make sure that your study plan is robust? You have to do extensive literature survey. When you identify your problem, you have to make sure that the problem that you're working on has to have some importance. There should be some novelty in the research proposal that you're suggesting. You may be working on something which has already been done, but you would look for research gaps, isn't it? Do you understand what a research gap is? Yes. What is it? Unexplored, unanswered questions, right? The word researche, right? The word research comes from researche, which means pursuit of knowledge, quest for knowledge. What does it mean? It also means search for truth, right? So that is why when we are searching for truth, we have to follow ethical principles. So your study design has to be on a problem which is an unmet need, which is an unexplored area, right? Isn't it? So that also would require a lot of adherence to different principles, ethical guidelines. I'll talk about what the ethical guidelines are, but I'm just trying to make you understand and aware that what you have to think about when you are designing your research problem. All right. So when you are designing your research problem, after an extensive literature survey, you will identify your problem and will make sure that other people are not working on that problem, right? Isn't it? You cannot just steal somebody else's work, or can you? No. So how will you make sure that you're not stealing somebody else's work? By reviewing, extensive literature survey. You'll have to check up with the Shodh Gagga portal in our in our country, and multiple other engine search engines for checking of different literature related to your problem. That is how you will be able to find out a research gap. So then coming to study design, you have to adhere to all the principles in which have been taught in research methodology, right? So your study design has to be robust. It cannot be a study design which will not see the you will not in which you will not get results at the end of the day. You also need to have some results, whether they are positive or negative. They are results are beat. Execution of the project. So for example, your volunteers, right? So you have to make sure that you do not compromise their confidentiality. You have to take informed consent. So these things have to be kept in mind while you are designing your research project. You are designing a research project, isn't it? Research proposal for your PhD. You will be working on a research problem, right? So you will have different methods, you will have different data sets, you may be working on animals, you may be working on survey based upon human participants, or you may be working on plants, or maybe on behavior, consumer behavior. So in any case, you have to maintain the confidentiality of those participants and have to take informed consent, right? Is it clear? Then collection of data. Collection of data. So during data collection, also lot of guidelines have to be followed. During analysis, you have to make sure that you do not adhere your results to your hypothesis. Whatever they should be, no bias in analyzing the results, right? And finally, publications. In publications, you have to make sure about who the author is going to be, like what is the authorship going to be in the publications, how you're going to present your results. Your results have to support your final finding. You should not extrapolate results based upon certain extrapolation of the data. Okay, one should be aware of. So for all these things, you should be aware of the ethical code of conduct that binds researchers at every stage. Okay. So for this, what is the body that we have? We have the Committee on Publication Ethics, which you also know as COPE, right? What is COPE? Committee on Publication Ethics. It's an international forum of editors and publishers for peer-reviewed journals, right? So actually, this mouse is not working properly. Sarah, can you please call this fellow Shakir, because it's a bit uncomfortable. So, Committee on Publication Ethics. So, how are these ethical codes of conducts? How do we know that we have to follow an ethical code of conduct? There is a body called as Committee on Publication Ethics. It's an international forum of editors and publishers for peer-reviewed journals. So they not only give you guidelines on how you have to publish ethically, they also give you guidelines on how you have to conduct the research ethically. All right. Then what do COPE guidelines provide? They provide the code of conduct and best practice guidelines that define publication ethics and advises editors on how to handle cases of research and publication misconduct, right? ये mouse थोड़ा सा चल रहा है. Slide नहीं बढ़ा पा रहे. Slide भी नहीं बढ़ रही है. ये mouse नहीं चल रहा है. So next slide was talking about why we need to publish, why we need to think about following ethics all the time. during our conception of the plan, during our design of the plan. You have to publish ethically because you are building a reputation for yourself, right? We are building a reputation for ourselves, right? Henna? Like when we are honest in how we present our research publication, research findings, we build a reputation for ourselves. You are in the beginning of your career, right? Whether you are beginning your career as a researcher or whether you are midway as a researcher or at a senior level, at every step you have to follow guidelines because if you want to make your research count, you have to present your findings honestly because this is the time when you're building a reputation for yourself, right? When people look at your work, they should be very confident that whatever you are presenting is a good piece of work, isn't it? Or would you want people to doubt the work that you have published? When we publish a piece of work, what do we build?
Reputation.
Yes, we do build reputation in addition to that. In addition to that, we also put a lot of data and findings in the literature search engines, right? Where other people might want to build up their hypothesis on the findings which we have presented to them, isn't it? वो भी नहीं चल रहा, बहुत तेज तेज चल रहा। Okay, fine. So not only are you building are the people at the back following what I'm saying? People at the back, are you following what I'm saying? So if you want to make your research count, you have to, other people need to have confidence in what you have presented, right? And that can only come when you're presenting your findings honestly, when other people are able to replicate your findings in their lab, right? Somebody else might want to perform the same kind of experiment which you have presented in your publication, right? So if you have not presented it well, if you have not presented it honestly, they'll not be able to replicate that finding, isn't it? So what will they lose? They will lose time and they will lose confidence in the integrity of your findings, right? So you are building as a starting researcher, you're building a reputation for yourself. So that is why you have to follow ethical code of conduct in scientific research. Why? Because you want to make your research count, isn't it? Yes or no? Yeah, be a bit, vocal because I need to understand that you are understanding what I am trying to tell you, right? So if you want to make your research count, whether you are starting out in your career or are a more seasoned researcher, you no doubt have to be aware of the importance of ethical conduct. So plagiarism, research fraud, undisclosed competing interests, there are a few issues that can threaten not only the integrity of science, but also one's standing in the scientific community. This is why you have to follow guidelines at every step of being a researcher. It does not end here. This is the beginning, right? So pay attention. This is the beginning. After 5 years, when you will be in a position when you will be, guiding somebody, you will be a supervisor. So you do not want to percolate a culture which is not based upon honesty, right? So an understanding of the ethical boundaries and rules is paramount to ensuring that your work and career gets off to the best start possible. Okay? So if you want a best start, not only a best start, the best end also has to be there. I mean, it will be very disgraceful if somebody is, found to be unethical. If it's found out that later in the life of that researcher, if it's found out that the findings that they had presented were not authentic, that also will harm the reputation of a seasoned researcher, right? And the main concern that I, as a researcher, have is that when this spurious data comes up in the landscape, right, in the publication landscape, when the spurious data comes out there, it breaks the backbone of entire research because we are building up on something which was not there. right? We are basing our hypothesis on a data which was not authentic. So whatever we are basing our data upon is also false. We'll never get the results, and the student will waste 5 years, right? The PI will waste a lot of time in deliberating upon a problem which was totally non-existent. Do you understand the gravity of the situation? So it will take some time because I have been told that there is a lag. Huh. So these are the top 5 reasons to publish ethically. Can you see the slides? So according to Elsevier, I have put the references at the end of the presentation, and for some slides I have put it at the slides only. So these are the 5 reasons to publish ethically. The number one reason is that it ensures scientific progress. So truth should be the foundation of science. Uh, and the progress of ideas. So the scientific community thrives only when each participant publishes with integrity, right? Each participant should publish with integrity. So the top one reason why you have to ensure that you have to publish ethically is because it ensures scientific progress, right? What is the second reason? It protects life and the planet. How does it protect life and the planet? When you publish ethically, how does it protect life and the planet? Because publishing ethically ensures that we have trusted information on which to build future therapies. When you're researching, what are you trying to do? All of you are research scholars. You must be having some idea why you came into research.
Problem.
Sorry?
You are trying to solve a problem.
Yes, you're trying to solve a problem. What kind of problem? Maybe give a transformative technology. Maybe give a therapy, which is not existent or is not available to patients, right? So you are building, publishing ethically ensures that we have trusted information on which to build future therapies, technologies, and policies. So this is the second reason why you should always try to not try, you have to publish ethically. Published work based upon fraudulent data can form an inappropriate basis to follow up. The main thing, I mean, I agree more with the second point because spurious data will build a false landscape of data on which we'll build our further research. And honesty breeds honesty, isn't it? Do you agree with me?
Yes.
So we will be able to, when we adhere to these ethical principles, we'll be able to build a culture of trust, right? Isn't it? It promotes ethical behavior. So if you are ethical, right, if your work is done ethically, the publications are, the information in the publications is disseminated ethically, it will build a culture of trust. So don't you strive for a honest culture? Yes, we all do, right? We all crave for a culture where we do not have this mistrust on different findings, right? How difficult it is when we are not able to trust, medicine, for example, right? When we go out to buy medicine, sometimes we feel apprehensive that, oh, probably I should not eat this medicine because maybe it will be spurious. So imagine how bad it will be for research community if we are trusting a bad source of data, right? So it builds a culture of ethical behavior, breeds ethical behavior. So it builds an ethical culture. It is good for your reputation. So we should all care about our reputation, right? Because our reputation builds the reputation of the organization that we are working for, right? So your research work, if it's done ethically, it will build the reputation of our organization because you are now associated with Integral University. So if you're not totally honest with the research findings, In disseminating the research findings, the reputation of our organization is also at stake. And later on, you may go somewhere else, right? So the reputation of that organization is also associated with your reputation, isn't it? So it is good for the reputation of entire research community, entire group. And finally, the fifth reason, and the main reason is it is the only way. Okay, remember this. It is the only way. Shifa, pay attention. This is the only way. Why is it the only way? Because you cannot afford to be unethical in reporting your data, in monitoring the data that you have collected. You cannot just go about blabbering about your volunteers with everybody. You have to respect their confidentiality. You have to respect their dignity. Being ethical in research is the only way. Remember it. Write it down on your notebooks. Etch it in your mind that this is the only way. Please do not go for shortcuts, right? Okay, because that shortcut is going to catch you at some point of time. So this is the publication ethics checklist, right? I told you right in the beginning, I told you about the flow of your research project, right? So what was the flow of your research project? Identification of the problem, study design, coordinated steps, right? और क्या था? Data collection, data analysis, then finally publication or a patent, right? Then a research proposal, based on your findings, your PI, your supervisor may want to apply to a funding agency for more funds. So the data has to be authentic, isn't it? So this is the publication ethics checklist that you always have to keep handy, okay? So whether you are a research scholar or whether you will become a professor at a later, at a later stage of your lives, this publication checklist, ethics checklist has to be there. What is the checklist? What does the checklist talk about? The first step is approval and consent. So you have already decided what you want to work on. So for example, your study plan involves volunteers, right? Or whether it involves a survey. For survey also you will need volunteers, or don't you need volunteers? Yes, we need volunteers. For clinical trials, we need volunteers. For certain animal studies, we need animals, right? So there are ethical bodies that govern the rights of the animals too. There are ethical bodies that govern the rights of human subjects. So the first thing that you have to be very conscious about is approval and consent, right? So what is the first step in the checklist? Approval and consent, right? So what are the questions that you're going to ask yourself? Do you have approval of the relevant regulatory authorities, right? Who will decide this? Do we have the consent of the approval of the relevant regulatory authorities? So as I said, you have already designed, I mean, this is the checklist that we are taking up after we have designed our problem. So you are fully aware, you and your supervisor are fully aware of what kind of study they have designed, isn't it? Right? So you would know whether you're using animals for the study, whether you're using volunteers for the study, whether you have to talk to different participants, right? So what is the first step? You have to make sure whether you have approvals of the relevant bodies, right? So how many people are working in the area of pharmacy and medicine and biology? Okay, chemistry. Nobody from chemistry? Pharmacy? You're from pharmacy. All right. So you might be designing your work on animals, right? So you have to take approval. You have to have the approval of animal ethics committee. If people from biology are working on genetically modified vectors or certain strains which can be pathogenic, they have to take approval from institutional biosafety committee. Okay. And if people are working on human volunteers, they have to have approval from the human ethical committee. So all these three committees are functional in the university. So all your proposals should have approval. So the first thing in the checklist is whether you have to ask you this question, you and your supervisor. What is the first question that you're asking yourself? Whether you have the approval of the appropriate what? Regulatory body. If it's yes, then you can proceed. If it's no, then you should stop there and then, get the approvals, and then you can start your study. Is it clear? Right? Then what is the second point? So if you're working on a clinical trial, have you registered your clinical trial? Again, your supervisor will be in a better position to guide you, right? Okay. So what are checklists? Checklists are just certain, they are just their points which help you remember whether you have ticked the correct boxes or not. If you have not ticked the correct boxes, you have to stop there and there, right? Research is a serious business, It's not like you cannot just walk through. Suddenly one day you will decide that you will go for research, research, you'll be a PhD scholar. It's a serious business which involves a lot of thought process and lot of input from your own side. Okay. Have you registered your clinical trial? Have you documented informed consent? This is again very, very important. You have to be aware of this. You have to check this point, yes, at the very beginning. Because if you do not have informed consent, what do you understand by informed consent? For example, your study involves participants, volunteers, right? They should be fully aware of why they are getting it into why they are a part of this study, right? And their participation has to be explained to them in a clear language which they can understand. All right. So if they are not, if their native language is, say Kannada, for example, so you have to make sure that they have been explained all the processes in the language that they understand. All right. So you need to have informed consent. What will happen if you do not check this point right here? Check this point tick at the beginning. So I'll tell you what will happen if you have, proceeded without getting the informed consents. When you reach the last point, last part of your research project was that you would publish your results, right? Or you will go for patent, right? So if you do not have informed consent, you cannot proceed for publication, because the first thing that they are going to ask you is whether you have the informed consent of the volunteers, right? So it's very, very important to have informed consent of the volunteers who are a part of your study. And when it comes to animals, so animal ethics committee would give you the correct, suggestions, and they will decide they will decide according to the guidelines what the size of the group has to be. All right. So the committee will suggest you the corrective measures. Then we'll go to the second point. What is the second point? Data. Now you are in your research flow chart, you are at a position where you are collecting data, right? You're collecting data. You will be collecting data on a day-to-day basis, or maybe monthly basis, depending upon your study. So it's variable, right? People who are working in wet labs, they'll be acquiring data every day. People who are working in surveys, they'll have a different study design. So we are at a stage where we have to collect data. So data monitoring is very another step where you have to be very, very careful. So you have to make sure that your data is accurate. What do you understand by accurate data? You have to report the data as you have obtained it, right? You cannot just decide to change the readings. You cannot just decide to increase the number of volunteers. You cannot just decide on your own that now I'll decrease the number of volunteers, right? So the accuracy has to be maintained without any falsification and fabrication. Okay? without any falsification and fabrication. So in this checklist, data accuracy is there. So the question that you are asking yourself and your PI, right? No, I'm not putting the entire responsibility on you at this stage because you are starting, you are starting your career. So the onus of maintaining all these things is not only on you, it's also on your supervisor, right? So we are not abdicating the supervisor from his or her responsibility. So you and your supervisor will ask your this question to themselves. So is there manipulation of material? What should be the answer?
No.
No. Yeah, very good. Is there manipulation of material, equipment, process, or data, right? So you should be answering no to all these questions because now we live in a world where we cannot fool anybody, isn't it? Uh, these equipment, whichever equipment you are using, they have system logs, right? System logs means that how many times you have made the run will be registered on the memory of that instrument and on the cloud. So you cannot just say that I did an experiment three times if you have not done it, right? So if you have done the experiment thrice, the system, the equipment memory would log it in the cloud. So we have better practices now. The machines are inbuilt with kind of system logs where you cannot do any kind of manipulation, right? So is there, one should not do, I mean, it's very unfortunate that we have to have all these checks and points because actually humans should be capable of, you should have this understanding that the findings are going to have some kind of impact on the humankind, so they should have been more vigilant, but since they were not, so we had to incorporate all these checkpoints in the machines, in the data monitoring process and other things too. So coming on to, so your answer to all this was, is there manipulation of material, equipment, process or data? Your answer was no, right? Have you double checked data for accuracy? This, yeah, yes, of course. Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that you're paying attention. That is the idea of having this class. That is why UGC wanted us to disseminate this information so that you are aware right in the beginning, right? So have you double checked data for accuracy? Yes, you have double checked, you have made sure, you have sat with your supervisor, right? Please find time to discuss your results with your supervisor. Open communication is very, very important, right? Open communication between the supervisor and the scholar is very important. Even if you're not getting the right kind of results, right kind, what do you understand by right kind?
What do you
Data which is not conforming to your hypothesis, it's okay. It's okay to discuss it with your supervisor if that this is what I'm getting, right? So maybe that negative result may be a starting point for a new discovery, right? That outlier, don't ever ignore the outliers because sometimes they may be origin of a new theory, right? So have open communication with your supervisors. It's very, very important. The more restricted you are, more scared you are, you'll not be a good researcher, right? Because now you are not, PG students and, where you have to be restricted. You are, what do you say? I told you, research A, right? You are in search of truth. You are in a quest of knowledge. So knowledge can be attained when you discuss, right? So discuss with your supervisors, find time to discuss with your supervisors. Otherwise, it's a total waste of time. You're wasting 5 years of your time if you do not reflect on your data, if you do not discuss it properly. Okay? So this you have discussed with your, is there any lurking false data? The third question. No. The answer should be no. So if you have answered everything no, honestly, Like again, we are depending upon your honesty because it's all based upon trust, right? So we are counting on your honesty. So we are believing what you are telling us, right? So then finally, we come to the third point, plagiarism and self-plagiarism. So I am sure by now you must be quite aware of these terms, but even if you're not, that's not a problem. This is why we are having this class. We'll talk about it later on. So the third point is whether you have, whether your work is original, right? Whether the paper that has been written by you is totally original, or have you taken a lot of inspiration? Not inspiration, you have just picked up material from somebody else's work. So what have you used your own prior work or copied others' work? Okay, this is a question that you're asking yourself. So plagiarism and self-plagiarism deals with whether you have copied the entire piece of work from somebody's published work or unpublished work. I mean, both ways, it's unethical practice, right? Okay, you can take inspiration by reading different papers. You're taking inspiration, isn't it? But you have to write it according to your own understanding, right? Better? Yes or no? So whatever, have you written your synopsis or not yet? So you will be writing your synopsis at some point of time in the next 3 months, probably, right? So you will be writing the introduction part. You'll be writing about what the hypothesis is. You'll be writing about the objectives, isn't it? So the introduction part, you will have to write in your own words by summarizing the findings of what others have already reported and paying more emphasis on what the novelty of your work is, right? Isn't it? So you cannot just lift somebody else's work and present it as your own, right? Okay, so there are a lot of tools which help you. There are a lot of AI based tools. So now with the advent of AI, we have a lot of guidelines which have been revised. I'll be talking about them at the in the due course of the lectures, right? So we'll be talking about that also, like how we have to responsibly use AI, if at all we want to use AI in our research, right? So plagiarism and self-plagiarism is also a big no-no. So have you used your own prior work or copied others' work? If so, have you cited these correctly? So there's no harm in using findings from other people's work, because you are also gaining inspiration from what they have reported, but you have to cite it properly. You have to give due credit to those original authors, right? Do you have written permission for reproduced material, figures or tables? So if you're using somebody else's figures, it does not, it does not, like we in biology do not do it generally, but maybe in other humanities and all, we create our own pictures, so we do not face these problems generally. But if you are using somebody else's pictures, right? Pictures means like tables, figures, or some graphical illustrations to supplement your point. You have to have a written permission from the original authors, right? Okay. So are you gathering what all you have to keep in mind? Remember it, right? Do not just let it move. Just it has to be deeply entrenched in your mind. So do you have written permission? So if you have written permission, you can use the figure or table, right? Okay, or the illustration. If you do not have the written permission, then what should you do? Try to introduce modifications, right? Not in the tables and figures. No, that's a big no-no. But if it's a graphical illustration of probably a mechanism, okay, so you can introduce different, points in that. But it's always better to have the original, like have permission, written permission from the original author. So it's not difficult to get that. nowadays the information of the author is on the papers itself. So you can write to the person, and they very happily allow people to use the material after giving proper citation. So you have to acknowledge their work. You know, the reference. Do you know references? The references are a part of your synopsis or anything that you write, any paper that you write. So the references is a way of acknowledging the work of those who have published earlier in that field, right? Then submission fraud. We have reached the fourth part. What is that? Submission fraud. What is considered as submission fraud? Simultaneous submission. Simultaneous submission is considered to be a submission fraud. So now you have reached a stage where you have consolidated your data, you have analyzed your data, you have applied all the right kind of statistical tools, and you have come to a conclusion based upon the data. And you have sent, now you are ready to send the paper for publication. Suddenly you decided, oh, okay, let me save some time and send the same paper to two journals simultaneously, right? So is it a good practice?
No.
It's not a good practice. Why is it not a good practice? Simultaneous submission is considered to be a submission fraud, period, right? So it does not fall in the ethical conduct of research. You should not send the same paper for reviewing to two journals simultaneously. Simultaneously, Mani? At the same time, right? So today I wrote a paper, I was ready, like as an author, I decided, okay, let me save my time and I'll send it to two journals, and whoever responds first with the positive reply, so I will publish in that. Right? It's a very common practice, and it's a submission fraud, right? At some point of time, if you are caught, doing this practice, they will blacklist you. You will not know, right? If you send the paper again to those publishing houses, your papers will not be considered. So they may not let you know that you have been blacklisted, but you will be blacklisted because your papers would be getting rejected back and forth, right? So why is it a fraud? Why is simultaneous submission a fraud? Why is it considered as a submission fraud?
Both the journals can accept.
Sorry?
Both the journals you submitted can accept your work.
Yes, they cannot accept. So it's a later, it's a problem which will arise at the later point of time. By submitting your paper to two journals at the same time, you are not respecting the time of those reviewers. Somebody has to put in time to review your journal, your paper. Like how do papers get published? They have to undergo a peer review process, right? So people like you and me would be spending some time, because our important time in reviewing reviewing your paper, right? So you are wasting time of 6 different people with the knowledge that you're only going to publish in one journal. So that is why it has been considered as a submission fraud, because you are not respecting the time and dignity of the reviewers who are they're wasting their time actually. One set is wasting their time. And another thing is that if you're working in a niche area, like if you're working in a niche area means like, for example, you're working in neurodegenerative diseases, right? Or a particular type of, disease in which the reviewers, the big groups may be interconnected. So if there is a chance that the reviewers might, flag it out to the editors. So avoid that. You may not be, you may not be saving a lot of time. You may be saving 1 week or 2 weeks, right? But you're losing your reputation, so don't do that. Wait for 2 weeks, wait for the rejection, send it to another journal, right? So simultaneous submission should be avoided at any cost. Have you published the entire work or part of it? So salami slicing is another term that you should be aware of. We'll talk about it in detail. So in submission frauds, like in this point, submission fraud, what are the different kinds of fraud, like misconduct, which is considered as a fraud? Simultaneous submission and salami slicing. Salami slicing means that you have sliced your research into multiple small studies, right? And at the end of these multiple small studies, you are still getting the same finding, right? So no matter if you had, consolidated the entire study into one publication, or you have divided the study in 10 publications, the finding was not going to change. So you just did it because you wanted to increase the number of papers that you're going to publish, right? Okay, so quantity of papers is not so important, quality is. So you should always strive for quality. Salami slicing is another malpractice which is associated with submission fraud. Okay, salami slicing. एक बड़े से, like you had a carrot and you sliced it in multiple pieces. So the harm that we did here was that we made so many people read our 7 papers, and at the end of 7 papers they only got one result, one finding, which may or may not be significant, right? So then we need to be mindful of ethics of authorship, right? So have you included, can you see it?
Yes.
Have you included all the authors in a specific pre-agreed order? So again, the onus is on your supervisor. So when you are designing the study, we should be very clear about who the authors are going to be on that study, right? Who is the author? Who is going to be the first author on your study? Like at the end of your PhD, who is going to be the first author? Yes, you are going to be the author because you have executed most of the work, right? You are going to be the first author because you have executed most of the work, right? Your guide is going to be the corresponding author because the guide might have, guide has conceived the work and written both of you have written the manuscript together, analyzed the data, right? So first author, so authorship is decided on the intellectual contribution that one does in the work, right? Isn't it? So the authorship, the order of the authorship should be pre-agreed. Pre-agreed as it at the beginning of the of our study, we should be very clear about who the authors are going to be. So if you have a collaborator, if there is a part in your study where a collaborator has to be taken in, right? So the collaborator can also be a part of the study because he or she would have made some intellectual contribution. So do you understand intellectual contribution?
Yes.
What kind do you understand? Like what do you understand? Somebody who has given you suggestions in how to improving your work, right?
Help you.
Has helped you. I mean, help can also be in the form that probably I have somebody else has a instrument and the person let you use the instrument. So will you put that person as an author?
No.
No. Intellectual contribution, right? Intellectual contribution has to be there. The person should have helped you in improving your research, right? By giving intellectual contribution. Lab assistance means like a part of the work has to be done in that lab, right? So a part means that the person has also helped you design that objective. Are you getting the point? So just using somebody's lab does not authorize the person to be a author, right? Why? Because the person has not made any intellectual contribution, right? Intellectual contribution means that okay, that objective, that entire objective has also been designed by that author, right? That is why the person is giving you space in the lab, and because all the objectives would be conducted, executed in that particular lab. Is it okay? Is that clear? So, have you included all the authors? So, if you are saying yes, then we can proceed. Do you have an agreement with co-authors? So this your supervisor has to worry about. Are the co-authors aware of the contents of the publication? So when you're proceeding for publication, like when you will be sending the paper out for publication, you have to share it with the co-authors before sending it for publication. Okay? Okay, so remember this because you need to have consent of those co-authors too. Because what will happen if, for example, your study comes into question, right? God forbid, the study comes into question, the co-authors are equally responsible for the integrity of that data, right? So you need to have consent from your co-authors also. So before sending the paper for publication, whoever is a part of your authorship, right, pre-agreed order of your authorship, like first author, second author, co-author, corresponding author, they all should be aware of the contents of the paper, right? So this again your PI has to take care of, but you as a student have to, what do you have to do? You have to remind them, okay, sir, we have these many people in the authorship list, so do we have consent from all of them, right? Okay, because they are equally responsible for the integrity of your data. So if your paper comes into question, their reputation is also damaged, right? That are the co-authors aware of the contents of the publication? Have they had access to the paper themselves and data? I mean, obviously, I told you in the beginning that they have to have some role in data analysis and interpretation. So obviously, if they are a co-author on your study, they would have contributed in data interpretation and analysis. Is there any ghost author or guest author? Last point you are answering. So, is there any ghost author or guest author?
No.
You are saying all the ideal things. No, yes, there shouldn't be any ghost author or guest author. We'll talk about what these guest authors are and ghost authors are. Ideally, your manuscript should not have ghost authors or guest authors. All right. And then finally, conflict of interest, right? So while sending your paper for publication or sending your project, research work for funding, you have to declare any conflict of interest, right? So you have to disclose a conflict of interest. What is a conflict of interest? Conflict of interest is any kind of financial, professional, or personal relationship that might affect the objectivity of the findings, right? So, for example, you're working on efficacy of a new drug, or probably you're checking the efficacy of, for example, a new drug, and that drug is being supplied by somebody for testing whom you are friendly with, or probably you're related with to, them, right? So you have to make sure that your findings are objective enough. Like this relationship should not affect the result. So for example, you're not getting a good efficacy, but because of that relationship, personal relationship, you are reporting findings which are favorable to the other person, that will be considered as a conflict of interest. So right in the beginning, you have to disclose the competing interests, right? So disclosure of having a conflict of interest is not a misconduct, right? We may have conflict of interest, right? But disclosing it, not disclosing the conflict of interest is a fraud, right? So, okay, I am testing a drug from a company where I have some, interests. I have to disclose it, right? You have to disclose it, right? So, after disclosure, if the reviewers want to proceed with the reviewing process, they will let you know. If they do not want to proceed, that is also their prerogative. But you have to disclose the conflict of interest. So this publication ethics list has to be kept in mind. It has to be printed out and kept on your desks where you are going to work, right? I hope that you're working, you'll be working in some kind of wet lab setting, most of you, or maybe on your computers, right? There would be some station where you'll be working on your research thesis, right? So keep this point handy so that you do not forget it, because if you forget any point of it today, 10 years later, 20 years later, it might kind of come to bite you. Why? Well, why will it come to bite you? Because nowadays we have post-publication review also. Are you getting my point? So you have published your data, right? It has undergone the review process, right? You know? So when it was published, it was understood that the review process was excellent and our findings were also very accurate and were supporting whatever conclusions we had drawn on the basis of the data, right? But this process does not end here, right? Now we have post-publication review process also, where certain, I can say, science sleuths, detectives, right? They have taken upon themselves that they are checking the database, you know, database of publications for fraud, right? So they are going through all these papers after post-publication also, and they are detecting, a lot of inaccuracies and fraud, misconduct, and they are reporting it, right? And in the case studies later on, during the course of our talk, I'll be talking about certain case studies in which people have lost their reputation, their jobs, and the findings that were very transformative, right? Some of the findings were very path-breaking, like what they had reported at that point of time, but they turned out to be false. And obviously, we did not have any path-breaking findings, right? So we have to be aware of this practice of post-publication review process also, right? So I'll talk about those engines later on. PubPeer is the engine where you will find information about post-publication review process. Then you have Retraction Watch. Retraction Watch is a consolidated database where you have all these papers which were called out and retracted, taken out from the literature because of misconduct. Okay? So is this checklist clear to you? Okay. So we, in the beginning, we had talked about the regulatory body, which talks about different guidelines, best practices of how research should be conducted. What was it called? Committee of Publication Ethics. So we also colloquially, we also call it as COPE. So what is the mission of COPE? COPE mission is to create a future in which ethical practice in scholarship is the cultural norm. So, how did COPE start? It was conceived by just 3 editors in 1997. And COPE is now a multidisciplinary international organization with more than 12,000 members worldwide. And now I must add here that they are all voluntary. They were doing this work on a voluntary basis because, it's not like they do not have anything else to do. They are doing it to give us access to good data, and they are helping us remove the spurious data from the databases, from the landscape. Okay, so COPE mission, why were the guidelines developed? It was developed to address breaches of research and publication ethics. COPE is a voluntary body, it's a voluntary body providing a discussion forum and advice for scientific editors. It aims to find practical ways of dealing with the issues and to develop good practice. Okay, है ना? तो कोप का जो मिशन है, कोप के guidelines, the कोप guidelines, you will get the guidelines everywhere. Whenever you are ready for publishing your work, and even if while writing your synopsis, you will be going through a lot of literature. So the papers already have they already have a disclaimer, kind of assertion that they follow the COPE guidelines, right? That means they are adhering to all the ethical practices that have been given in COPE guidelines for authorship, for reviewing, for editorship, for data monitoring, data accuracy, and data interpretation, right? One point I would, like you to go back because I think I forgot to mention it. That was also a very important point. Data monitoring and recording is also has to be done ethically, right? Data monitoring and recording. Data recording. What do you understand by data recording? Yes, Peter.
In case of primary data?
Yeah, details of the primary data. So you need to have a data recording book, right? So in in the Western labs and in some labs in India, we have digital data lab books. Okay, digital, you know. The data lab books would be feeding the data real time, and at the end of the day, at the end of the day or whatever time your PI has decided, the data notebook will be closed. Closed as it digitally closed, you will not have access to that. So whatever interpretation or results interpretation you have to do, you have to do it in a stipulated point of time. This is also a tool to maintain the integrity of data, because you will not have access to the data notebook every time, so you will not be able to change the readings, right? So it's a real-time way of monitoring and acquiring the data. But for example, you are acquiring the data on a hard notebook, right? Okay. So the laboratory notebooks should always be numbered. Okay. They should be numbered. So you get these practical laboratory notebooks for data recording. They have numbers, page numbers, entrenched on them, right? Punched into them. So it's better that you get those notebooks for recording the data so that there wouldn't be any question about how you have acquired your raw data. Are you getting my point? So that the numbers will be there. There's no chance of tearing a page or making a correction. So even if you have to make a correction, put a cross and write down, okay, this was the correct reading, right? Are you getting the point? So data recording and acquisition is another point where you have to be very, very careful, because sometimes the reviewers ask you for the raw data files. So if you say that you have used a particular instrument for acquiring the data, that's excellent, because the instrument would have the original readings. But for example, you are writing down the readings on your own, you need to have some kind of support of the data acquisition, right? Okay. And for images, like for example, you are reporting a result in the form of microscopy images. So you have to make sure that all the conditions were the same for every kind of image that has been taken, so that the results that are obtained are not again spurious, biased. You do not report a good result for test and other kind of result for your control, right? So again, you don't have to worry too much about that, because the instrument would already have a system log where it will tell you the parameters at which you have clicked every kind of picture, right? So data acquisition and monitoring is another step where you have to be very, very careful. You cannot generate raw data at the end of the research. Remember it. So, will you be able to generate raw data at the end of research when you're ready for publication? No. So it has to be done on a day-to-day basis, right? And it's a better practice that you get the data signed by your supervisor, right? So it will be a record that you have already discussed the data, Okay, and the supervisor has also given you inputs, right? So it's a good practice to maintain a good data notebook with numbers, page numbers, so that there is no chance of tearing away pages. But in other labs, there is access to digital notebooks, which I mean, they are password protected and very limited access is to that kind of data, right? Okay. Right, we'll go to the next step. So I think I told you about Go. I hope you have retained some part of what we have talked about. Can you summarize it till I get access to the next slide? Somebody will have to summarize at the end of the class, so be ready for that. Because you're not allowed to sleep. Okay. So are we aware of the Cove mission? Yes, we are aware of the Cove mission. They gave us the guidelines for responsible conduct of research and following ethics during the conduct of research, right? So ethics, approval, informed consent, and data confidentiality. So good research should be well justified, well planned, appropriately designed, and ethically approved. This you must have, come across during your research methodology classes. So there's nothing new in it. To conduct, second point is new. To conduct research to a lower standard will also constitute misconduct, right? Lower standard means to conduct any kind of research which is a rehash of older study, just you have changed the numbers and you consider that to be a good piece of research. Knowingly conducting such a, kind of research which is of lower standard will also constitute as research misconduct. So whenever you design a problem, it should have some societal impact, or should it not? It should have a societal impact. So can you quickly, a couple of you tell me like what you have thought about working on and how that's going to have a societal impact? Anybody? See, you have to leave. Yes, yes, please.
I'm trying to work on machine learning algorithms that will help detect the stages of kidney problem.
Okay. So how do you think that it will have an impact on society?
It will help the doctors in diagnosing the stages of kidney CKD
Okay.
correctly, which is
All right.
one of the problems that we are facing right now.
So obviously, when we start with a research problem, we always have this, hope, and I mean, if we are driven towards good research, we always think that we are going to make a significant contribution in elevating the problems of humankind, है ना? इसीलिए हमने research choose किया होता है ना कि नहीं? Have we chosen? I mean, is this the chosen path that you have, chosen for yourself, or have you been driven forcibly in this?
I chose.
You chose. So I'm sure all of you have chosen too, right? So, like while you're designing your research project, it should have a societal impact. So, why this low standard research is constituted as a misconduct? Because you're knowingly doing something which is wasting everybody's time, and it's not only time, effort. It's not. Isn't money involved in research? Aren't we going to waste precious taxpayers' money in conducting a piece of research which is not useful? Where is the money going to come from? Like for funding, we are using taxpayers' money, right? So that money is very precious, right? If we waste it in some fanciful work, that is a misconduct. So right away, while designing your work, you should be aware of the impact. It may not be a great impact, means like, transformative impact, because transformative impact involves a lot of teamwork. We are a small, doing our small bit in that kind of transformative impact, right? Collaboration is the key. But knowingly designing a piece of work which will give you, 2 papers or 3 papers in 3 years, and just rehashing whatever has been done already is a misconduct. Be mindful of that. So actions that are to be taken by you, laboratory and clinical research should be driven by protocol. Pilot studies should have a written rationing. Research protocols should seek to answer specific questions just rather than just collect data. So data collection is just a part of your research problem, right? You are looking at the bigger picture, right? The data collection is just a part of that. So your research problem should not be only focused on data collection. It should also have, the results should have some positive impact on, it should add to the knowledge, or shouldn't it? Yes, it should add to existing knowledge. Your work, at the end of 4 years of your work, we should have some findings which will add to the knowledge landscape. Otherwise, it's not useful, right? So those may be negative results also, means results which are not conforming to your hypothesis. They may be positive results also, but the results should contribute to knowledge addition, right? So that is why research has been kept at the highest level of learning, right? Isn't it? Protocols must be carefully agreed by all contributors and collaborators, including, if appropriate, the participants, right? So pre-agreed order, we had talked about a pre-agreed order. So this is where pre-agreed order will come into place. You will engage your supervisor will engage collaborators, will engage all the participants of the project, as in authors, right? Participants you are including in the form of informed consent, right? Henna? Yes? Yeah. Okay. The final protocol should form part of the research record. So final protocol, how will you know that your protocol has been finalized? Third row, can you answer this question? How will we know that our research protocol has been finalized? After we get a approval from the regulatory body, right? Whichever is appropriate for us. Okay. Okay, so early agreement on the precise roles of the contributors and collaborators and on matters of authorship and publication is advised, right? Earlier it was advised, now we, in the due course of time, we have come to this conclusion that it should be there. It's an advice which should be followed to the T. We should enter into a pre-agreement for authorship, because there are a lot of authorship disputes start at the end of the study. Statistical issues should be considered early in study design to ensure there are neither too few or too many participants. How will you address this? How will you make sure that your study design has the correct type of statistical tools that should be applied?
Discussing with the PI.
And yes, discussing with the PI. So the PI would have have a fair idea of which tests have to be applied on that set of data, right? And it's all,
Pilot study.
sorry.
Pilot study.
Pilot study, yes, proof of concept, but sometimes you may not have time to do a pilot study, but probably a senior in your lab may already have worked on a part of that project, and you will have some proof of concept which is available. And it's always a good idea to engage a statistician, a trained statistician, because that collaborator would be a better person to guide you, right? So a biostatistician or a statistician can be included as part of your project. Okay. So again, this onus is not on you; it's on the PI of your study. But when you become PIs, you have to. I hope. I hope that is your, quest, that you will become PIs at some point of time, maybe in a company or in a university or in some other setting. Do you know what a PI is? You know, right? So I'm talking to the right kind of audience. Okay, so formal and the formal and documented ethical approval from an appropriately constituted research ethics committee is required for all studies involving people, medical records, and anonymized human tissues. Okay, so third point, formal and documented ethical approval from an appropriately constituted body. Use of human tissues in research should conform to highest ethical standards, such as those recommended by Newfield Council on Bioethics and ICMR guidelines. So if our study involves human tissues, so we have to follow the recommendations of Newfield Council on Bioethics or ICMR guidelines, Indian Council of Medical Research guidelines. Okay. It's not moving. It's very restrictive. Right. Then we have already talked about this. Fully informed consent or should always be sought right at the beginning, because at the end, like while you are ready for publication, you will not be able to harness so many informed consents, right? Then the only option left with you would be to resort to unethical practices, which you know that you don't have to do that. So you need to have informed consent of the participants. When participants are unable to give fully informed consent, research should follow international guidelines such as those of the Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences. So for example, your participants are not in a position to give consent, right? So maybe they are medically not fit, right? So then there are guidelines for such kind of participants. We have to follow them and have to have the right kind of people in those committees. So there are guidelines for what the composition of that committee should be, when the consent should be, acquired, and who will be in a position to give consent on in place of those research subjects who are not in a capacity to give informed consent. Animal experiments require full compliance with local, national, ethical and regulatory principles and local licensing arrangements. Formal supervision, usually the response formal supervision. This last point is very, very important. Formal supervision, usually the responsibility of the PI, principal investigator, should be provided for all research projects. So your research topic is also a research project, right? It's a project which will help in where the findings of your research thesis will help in building a bigger project, right? Bigger project for funding. So the formal supervision is usually the responsibility of the PI. It should be provided for all research projects. This must include quality control and the frequent review and long-term retention, right? Retention of what? Of all records and primary outputs. So your data notebook becomes a property of the institution, because we are supposed to retain the data notebooks for at least 15 years, right? We may be asked for the raw data. We may be asked for the strains which you have generated for as a part of your study. Okay? So 15 years, for 15 years at least, we have to retain the data records of all the projects, all the thesis and the raw data which is a part of your thesis, right? So I think I'll stop here. Should I or should I proceed? I should stop? No, but I have 30 more minutes, so why should I stop? Okay, I'll go through 2 more slides and then I will ask you to summarize a few points for me so that I get an idea of what you have, understood, right? So we come to the next point, data analysis, right? So data should be appropriately analyzed. Okay, it should be appropriately analyzed. So for that, I had already told you that you should discuss with your PI. If the PI does not have a fair idea of which tools have to be used, you can engage a statistician, right? I mean, my personal, it may be a personal view, but I always think that engaging a biostatistician or a statistician for such practices is a better practice because you are on a good footing right from the beginning of your study. And it also fosters a culture of collaboration, right? So, but inappropriate analysis does not necessarily amount to misconduct. Now, this is a contradictory thing, right? Like if you have accidentally misanalyzed your data, right? It's an honest error on your part because probably you were not aware of which tests you had to apply or whether your number of participants. Generally, you will not have problem with the number of participants because the ethics body would have taken care of that, right? While you were going for your approvals, the ethics clearance committee would have made sure that you have the appropriate number of participants. So you will not face a problem with the number of participants. You may face a problem on the appropriate testing tool that you have to apply to that set of data, right? So if you have accidentally misanalyzed your data, that will not be considered as a misconduct because it's an honest error, right? Honest errors are not a part of misconduct. Okay, what is misconduct? Knowingly putting false data in the data landscape. Right. Okay. So fabrication and falsification of data do constitute misconduct. I have marked it in red for a reason. Right? The reason is that you have to avoid falsification and fabrication, no matter how pressured you feel. I know PhD is a high pressure degree. Why? I mean, why is it a high pressure degree? Why do you think? It shouldn't be. If you love doing research, if you are driven by motivation, you should enjoy the journey. Okay, and during the journey, you will have ups and downs, which you will have in the form of getting the data, not getting the correct results. We don't know what the desired results are, so that is why we have to be open, right? We have to always be in an exploratory mode, right? So yeah, you will feel some pressure, but never succumb to the pressure is my advice to you, right? Because if you succumb under pressure, you will be forced to fabricate and falsify, which will kill your career, right? You have to be dishonest only once, and then you will not you will not feel guilty about it, and you will continue that practice, and it will be so bad for you, right? So please refrain. Don't succumb to pressure. Don't falsify the data. Don't fabricate the data. Whatever you are getting, discuss it with your PI. There has to be an explanation for what you're getting. And in science, they generally say that if you're getting the same kind of data thrice, that means there is a high level of reproducibility and that result is correct. So try to find a reason why you're getting that result rather than conforming or conforming your results by falsification or fabrication to a desired result, right? So fabrication and falsification of data do constitute misconduct. It may appear to be preachy, the class may appear to be preachy, but this is the only way that I can inculcate in you the culture of honest data, no matter how long it takes. And you can yourself, you are also aware, you can yourself look up for case studies in which careers have been killed, and not only careers, I mean, people's lives are also at stake. right? Watch that movie, The Good Doctor. I'll also suggest certain movies at the end of the talk. So if you have time, watch those movies. It will give you an idea of how harmful such practices are. Okay. So all sources and methods used to obtain and analyze data, including any electronic pre-processing, should be fully disclosed. Detailed explanations should be provided for any exclusion. So inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria of all the subjects has to be very, very clear. This is a part of your study design. So the participants that you are going to include in your study design and the participants that you are going to exclude in your study design has to be very clear. So it's not about participants also, data sets. For example, you're working on AI, right? So for AI, training of the AI tool, you would require certain data sets, right? So for that also, you have to have a good understanding of how your data set is going to be unbiased. So it's not like you will, all of you will be working on volunteers and participants. Some of you may also be working on AI-driven, data. So that data has to be such that it does not bias your training tools, right? So methods of analysis must be explained in detail and refereed if they are not in common use. The post hoc analysis of subgroups is acceptable as long as this is disclosed. Failure to disclose that the analysis was post hoc is acceptable. The discussion section of a paper should mention any issues of bias which have been considered and explain how they have been dealt with in the design and interpretation of the study. Okay. Maybe the mouse will work. Okay, I'll stop here and we'll talk about authorship in the next class. And I hope to see all of you tomorrow. So we have a good presence today. I hope that we'll see all of you tomorrow on Saturday, the 4th of January, 4th day of the new year. And I hope that all of you are having a good start to 2025. And I hope that you will honor us by keeping all these practices in mind, okay? Because your reputation builds the reputation of the organization, right? If you fail, we fail, right? So thank you so much for your attention. And if you need any material, anyways, I'm going to share the material on the group, reading material. A lot of references are already integrated into the presentation. Okay. Fine then. Thank you. Sarah, can you call the person so that have a seat. We have not. I have not dismissed you. I think I had. So I had asked you that at the end of the class. Now we are not live. I think, or are we?
Yes.
So I wanted you to summarize it. Somebody to summarize.
So can I ask question before the summary?
No, somebody needs to. इसको बंद कर दीजिए. Somebody needs to summarize and then we can take the question.
This one was Ari. You need to summarize.
Is you are representing?
No.
बंद करवा दीजिए. So tomorrow we are going to talk about the ethical principles that govern authorship, and we are also going to talk about obligatory journals, and finally maybe in the 3rd or 4th class we'll talk about case studies, so that you have an idea of what happens, what are the different kinds of misconduct which have already been reported, and what were the penalties that those PIs had to face, right? So is that fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. Somebody was summarizing. I also need you to introduce yourselves because I do not like to talk to anonymous people in the class. I need to know your names.